Hi everyone, so last year I did a recap of every single video I uploaded in 2024. When I say recap, what I mean is I would just restate the overall central argument for each video in my view. And I guess the point was to be able to say these are all the arguments I've advanced this year. And I guess the other thing is, I would like it if you guys would click on the link to the playlist in the description and actually watch every single video I uploaded last year. When you hear me working my way through this recap and you hear one of the arguments I present and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that argument, or you haven't even seen the video, go check it out. Don't pretend that you aren't sleeping to these videos, doing the dishes, playing video games. You can easily work your way through every single video I uploaded without any effort from you. In fact, if anything, it will make your life less boring because while you're doing all those boring things, you can be listening to me instead. At the end, I'll probably give a little recap of last year and give my plans for the coming year. But right now, let's just jump straight into January 2025. And the conceit of what I'm doing here is already off to a pretty bad start because my very first video was responding to Jammy Dodger, where a whole load of different disjointed points were made. The main thing that stands out from the video for me is Jammy just constantly obsessively attacking Helen Joyce based on the fact she isn't qualified to talk about this issue, she isn't an expert, because she doesn't have a formal academic degree in a directly related subject. Now, obviously I pointed out this is very elitist and it ignores a lot of how actual knowledge is acquired, but the simplest rebuttal is just that Jammy claims to be an expert based on having been trans for a long time, but Helen Joyce has been a woman for much longer, so that makes her, according to Jammy's own logic, an expert on who is a woman. Now, the next video is also a little bit difficult because it's, again, another response to another YouTuber who likes to gish gallop and not really make one singular point. This is, of course, my remake of one of the first gender-critical responses I ever made, responding to ContraPoints on broadly being gender-critical. I don't think there's one singular point that gets at the entire argument of the video, but there is one big takeaway I could present. See, Contra spends this entire video constantly clarifying what's not being said about whether somebody's a woman. Contra talks a lot about sexual preferences, but clarifies that doesn't make you a woman. Contra talks about gender stereotypes, but clarifies that's not what makes you a woman. Contra talks about elective identity, but again, clarifies that's not what makes you a woman. And at one point I say, it's really nice I don't have to constantly be clarifying what it is that doesn't make someone a woman, because I've made it so clear and so logically intuitive what does make someone a woman. That's the big takeaway here. Trans activists, despite using the phrase exclusive a lot to describe their opponents, are the ones who are constantly having to talk in terms of what doesn't make someone a particular identity, because they're not able to offer any credible positive case for what does. Next, we have this video responding to a much smaller YouTuber, and this individual is by no means a hidden gem. The arguments they present are in fact terrible. In particular, the main issue is that for every argument she makes, she almost always expresses the exact opposite sentiment on a different issue. So, of the many examples I could draw from, the funniest is easily when she says that the gender-critical movement is disgustingly misogynistic because when they're talking about so-called trans men, they think they are women who have been pressured by society in some way to reject their femininity and identify as men. Because, that's sexist against women to say that women can't just make choices their own, to say that they are pressured by society. What are they, stupid? But then, when she's talking about the concern radical feminists have about male violence, she, without a trace of irony, says that this is completely unfair because men are only violent due to being pressured by society. So when men murder women and girls, that's toxic masculinity, that's the media, that's economic factors, that's not their fault. But when women identify as men in an effort to escape this violence, how dare you suggest there's some underlying reason for that might be needing to be explored? How dare you say this isn't just their completely free choice being made in a vacuum with no context to consider whatsoever? And then we close out this month with another response video, this time responding to Alex Gunter, responding to me, arguing that the trans rights movement is not a civil rights movement. My main argument is that unlike other rights movements that have advanced with popular grassroots support, trans activism has relied on lobbying elite to enforce this from the top down. Alex Gunter's main response to this is to say, well, that doesn't make sense because now there's a huge backlash against the trans rights movement, and that shows that it hasn't been successful. But the backlash has in fact been a popular backlash, so this entirely proves my point. I argue that the trans activist movement has achieved success by appealing to the elites and largely keeping the general public ignorant about what they're doing. And now there is a huge backlash against the trans rights movement, and that has coincided with mass public awareness of the issue. When trans activists achieved most of their success in the 90s and the 2000s, that's when the average person didn't really think much about the trans issue at all. But now that people know about it, they're starting to object. So Alex's counter-argument just further evidences my original claim. And wow, I was really doing a lot of response videos at the start of the year, wasn't I? Weird, because I don't think I really have done that many response videos recently. Because next was a response to the YouTube channel Some More News, where the main argument they were presenting was that trans people are real. The problem here is that they equivocate around the word real, seeming to think that actually exist and are accurate about the claims they're making mean the same thing. So he says, well, obviously trans people exist because it's not a fad. If it was a fad, it would be fake, but since it's not a fad, that means it's true. And I just pointed out that kids aren't into alchemy nowadays. You can say that alchemy is a fad, but it doesn't therefore follow that alchemy actually works and you can just turn any metal into gold. And I also pointed out there might be some things that are fads, but are nonetheless still accurate. So the problem with this video is that it's trying to argue for a position while pointing out loads of stuff that isn't actually relevant to the conclusion. Next, and in advance of Valentine's Day, we had one of my better videos where I explore the difficult question of whether it's gay for a man to sometimes be attracted to trans women. And in particular, I was concerned with the question of whether if a otherwise heterosexual man is attracted to trans-identified males, does that mean that it makes sense to conclude that trans identity is valid? But my basic point is that sexuality is complicated, and there are a variety of reasons why a biological male might engage in same-sex activity or have some degree of same-sex attraction without it making sense to categorize them as gay. More to the point, if someone is attracted to women and they're attracted to men, but only to the extent that those men go out of their way with makeup and cosmetic surgery to make themselves look like women, I think at that point it just makes more sense to say they're attracted to women. What I do say here though is that while being attracted to a trans-identified male in spite of them having a penis is one thing, if you're a guy who wants to interact with a penis and that specifically is appealing to you, I've got news for you. You're gay. So that video was in anticipation of my next video, which was responding to ContraPoints on whether traps are gay. The problem is that I, in my infinite wisdom, had already anticipated all of the possible points that Contra could have made, and as such, not much of value was really said in the response video itself. The main thing I would have pointed out is that while some trans women might be attractive to straight men, that doesn't prove that trans identity is valid. Because no man, indeed no body, is attracted to somebody based on their identity. And that is the issue with defining your identity based on whether people want to have sex with you. Next, because it was Oscar season, I did a review of Emilia Perez, that movie where a cartel boss starts transitioning to being a woman. My main point was that the movie didn't really say anything about being trans that was worth dissecting, and apart from that, the plot was incredibly boring and the music was very bad. I will say though that looking at Oscar-nominated movies is very interesting to me, and because of course we're approaching Oscar season again, I've already began working my way through and beginning to script reviews of the movies nominated for this coming Oscars, and I'm going to be doing a review of that on my vlog channel, so I can't link to it now, but I would just link you to something I've done which is similar to this, which you can check out, and of course you should subscribe to my vlog channel in anticipation of that review. While I'm on the subject, I'll say, of course, this is a review of the previous year. Well, what I've already done on my vlog channel is presented my New Year's resolutions for this year, and almost all, in fact, in reality, all of them are related to me producing content on YouTube, so you definitely should check that out if you're interested enough in this channel to care about its future. So I will link to that, and again, if you subscribe to that channel, you'll see my Oscar reviews when they come out. So my next video was about whether we should trust the science, and while I do talk a lot about science more generally here, rather than the trans issue, I do make one point relevant to trans. The trans issue really isn't about science, because science is about laboratory conditions and experimentation and stuff like that, and society isn't a laboratory setting. My point was that science can tell us the results of trans ideology in our society right now, but it can't tell us whether we should be doing things differently. And the analogy I make is to imagine two mice in a laboratory, and one says to the other that if they escaped from their cage, They could go out and they could get their own food. But the other one says, no, the only way that we can get food is by just doing the tasks that the scientists want us to do, and they'll give us food as a reward. The point is that getting too obsessed about what the scientists are saying can stop people from thinking about how maybe we should actually be aiming to get beyond the conditions the scientists are evaluating. Next, we have another non-response video, so we're very much clear of that time when I was just doing nothing but responses. This one was about whether it's good for the left and the right to agree with each other and to unite on certain issues, and there's many reasons why I'm sure you can imagine I would argue this could be beneficial. So I'll just focus on a more novel contention of mine. Most people would prefer a politician who they strongly disagree with on some issues if they can also therefore agree with them strongly on others, compared to a politician who's very wishy-washy and doesn't actually commit to any position at all. Because the latter is going to be dishonest and definitely ineffectual because they don't have any sort of grand vision. By contrast, someone who has a big plan, even if you don't agree with a lot of aspects of it, at least you can be reassured that they actually have a plan, they're going to do it, and therefore the things that you do agree with, at least you will get that stuff. Okay, now we're back to the responses, and a response to Bill Nye the Science Guy and his argument for being trans. The main issue I have is that he constantly just jumps around from discussing sexuality, biological sex, gender expression, and trans identity. It's like he just doesn't even care what specific term he's using. He just views all these things as totally interchangeable. So he'll talk about your sexuality being determined by your chromosomes and things like that. Obviously, all of those four things are in fact very different, and the only one of them that really matters is trans identity. Can a biological male be a woman? And on that question, he doesn't really say much at all. Now, this video was preparation for responding to a H-Bomber Guy video where he defends Bill Nye. And this video has the distinction of being the last video I ever watched while I still agreed with trans ideology. So it was very cathartic for me to come back and watch it, being now someone who disagrees with it. And yes, of course, it's very embarrassing for me going back and watching this, knowing that I used to actually think it was good and now seeing how many terrible points there are. But I think the biggest embarrassment here is for H-Bomber Guy, because he, in this video, criticizes Bill Nye, just like I did, for not saying anything really substantial about trans identity itself. You know, it seems like from his perspective, he thinks that what Bill's saying isn't really very convincing, it doesn't really provide much information, basically the same criticisms I made. But then, at the end of the video, he asks a trans person for their opinion, and they say, you know, I think Bill did a fantastic job of explaining the trans position and what it means to be trans in elaborate detail. And I think this video was just totally fantastic. And H-Cuckold Guy reacts to this by just self-flagellating and being like, oh man, I'm just a total idiot. I'm a cis loser because I thought the video didn't make very many points at all, but this trans queen has come along and corrected me. But my takeaway from this is that actually what this person is admitting is that the trans position is insubstantial. There isn't anything to it. There isn't any science to it. And that's why both H-Bomb and I recognized that Bill wasn't providing any science. He wasn't providing any insight, but from a trans person's perspective, they actually get what the trans movement is really about. H-Bomber Guy was close to understanding that, but then he refused to believe it. He shut down because he couldn't accept that's the reality. Very sad stuff. Next, going into April, we have another non-trans video, which is slightly more of a theme this year, and this one was comparing capitalism and socialism. Basically, I just explain the objective difference between capitalism and socialism, and then I explain why I am a capitalist. I first of all point out that those who own capital are taking on a risk, and we understand, typically, that taking a risk is something that can justifiably be rewarded. And on this note, I largely defend our contemporary financial system and particularly explain how fractional reserve banking makes a lot of sense and is a good way to have a prosperous, strong economy. This video, it has to be said, was a bit of a black pill regarding the intelligence of a vocal minority of my comment section who decided to argue against the video by repeating my beliefs back to me with the same justifications that I'd already presented for them in the video, as if they were arguing with me. Like, despite the fact that I explicitly said that capitalism can be justified by the fact that those who own capital are taking on risk by owning and managing it, I had innumerable comments from people saying, no, you're wrong, capitalism is good because capitalists take on risk. As if that wasn't literally an argument I made in the video, and my primary argument presented for why I am a capitalist, which I described myself as being in the video. It's like, my entire audience just had a collective brain aneurysm. After this, we had one of my most popular videos of the year responding to Professor Dave on the trans issue. Now, Pro Dave is a scientist apparently, so I'm not going to focus on just how badly I destroyed him with facts and logic when it came to the science. But the thing is, saying trans women are women is ultimately making a claim about how it makes sense to define a word. And when it comes to how language works, he clearly has no idea what he's talking about, because his main argument is just that trans women are women because the meaning of the word woman has changed. And I pointed out 3 issues with this claim that because words organically change meaning, everyone should just accept this in the case of trans women. Firstly, etymologically, this just might not make sense. Like, it wouldn't make sense to start saying that an atheist is someone who believes in God because the prefix a literally means not, so not atheist. Secondly, it might take away the sociological meaning conveyed by a term. For example, if you say that Donald Trump can just identify as a woman, then he could become the first woman president. But that doesn't tell us anything about how women's position in society and politics has changed. It just means that we've used the word woman wrong. And finally, and most importantly, the fact that anyone is even arguing about this shows that the word has not changed meanings organically. Employing language has changed as an argument for why someone should accept a new definition of a term is incoherent, because if the language actually had changed, you wouldn't be arguing about it. Next, for Easter, I made a video explaining why I'm not Jewish, which is to say why I don't find the claims of Judaism to be convincing. My main argument was that the Old Testament contains loads and loads and loads of little details that work far more interestingly and more coherently with Christian theology than they do with Jewish theology. This is a point that can only be meaningfully proven by looking deeply into Christian commentaries on the Old Testament, which you should do if you're interested in this. And I, as someone who has looked into this, am very convinced by the Christian side, and I've not heard any good explanation from Jews about why the central text of their religion works much better with a false imposter religion. So that tells me that actually Christianity probably isn't the false imposter religion. It probably is the religion that was always supposed to follow on from the Old Testament, and therefore Judaism is not correct. Next, we have this video explaining how I became gender critical. The main story here is that from a very early age, I was unambiguously progressive on every single issue. And funnily enough, it was me becoming Christian that started me off being gender critical, but not in the way you'd think. And while you think the previous video could be relevant here, it actually wasn't my issues with Judaism, but my issues with Islam. Basically, as I became a theist, I started to look a lot more into various religious claims, and the more I looked into Islam, the more I realized the standard progressive narrative around it just isn't at all accurate. And that was the first domino to fall in me realizing that sometimes the standard prepackaged progressive position isn't always the correct one. And as soon as I then felt free to think critically about the trans issue and realize I didn't just have to accept it because I'm a progressive, I immediately realized it was nonsense. And now people will find out I'm religious and I'll be like, you only reject trans people because you're religious. And I want to say no, because it's not as simple as just, the Bible says it's wrong, therefore I hate it. But in reality, they're sort of right. Like, becoming Christian was a big part of why I realized trans ideology was wrong, just in a very indirect sense. Next, we have this video called Trans Genocide Revisited in Trump's America. This was a follow-up to a video pre-Trump's second term about whether or not there's a trans genocide. And in that video, I went through the 10 stages of genocide people talk about, and I explained how none of them apply to trans identity. In this video, I took the opportunity to respond to some trans activists who were arguing that actually now we do have a trans genocide happening. And I actually think the standout thing from this video wasn't really to do with their arguments, but much more to do with their attitude. It's still burned into my mind that one of the people I was responding to said, "It's not going to be easy, But in this video, I'm going to try to argue that we have gone through all 10 stages of genocide for trans people. In other words, literally admitting that he viewed these stages of genocide as just a fun challenge. His goal was to see if he could contrive reasons to think that every single one of these things has applied to trans people. And I can't think of a better representation of trans ideology than that. Reality means nothing to them. Whether there actually is a trans genocide doesn't matter. All that matters is that they can flex their intellectual control over others by redefining terms until it fits their agenda. We start off May with my most popular video of all time comprehensively debunking trans ideology. I do just want to say I am so grateful that this video, where I argue my case as well as I can, is my most popular. It's also going to be hardest to summarize because obviously this video was a summary of my arguments against trans identity. So I'd basically be trying to summarize my entire channel if I were to try to summarize this video. But I think the best argument from it is probably the trans trilemma argument. Basically, you can define women in 3 ways. Either you define it by being entirely about self-identity and a vague feeling, in which case it has no meaning and therefore it's incoherent and circular. Or you define it by traditional gender roles and expectations, in which case it is reductive and sexist. Or you define it by being biologically female. And I don't think trans activists have shown a good argument for why that would be as harmful as the other 2 ways of doing it. The only problem for them, of course, is that that would mean excluding biological males. Next, we have a video from Katie Montgomery where a spectrum from red to green is shown and several colors are isolated along that spectrum. And then Katie says if we can recognize that there are more than 2 colors on that spectrum, then we should be able to recognize there are more than 2 sexes because sex is a spectrum. More specifically, the argument is that gender criticals are obviously stupid because many GCs, when they saw this spectrum of just 2 colors, said there were only 2 colors there. Silly them. And I've just pointed out that context matters here, that even if we would identify multiple colors when these colors are presented in isolation, we can still recognize that a spectrum from green to red is ultimately a spectrum derived from only 2 colors, and as such we can say there are just 2 colors there, and shades in between. But more to the point, even if we could agree with Katie about this issue, there would still be the fact that biological sex is not like the color spectrum. Penises don't get more and more vagina-y until they become vaginas, in the same way that green can get more and more red until it becomes red. And weirdly, Katie even acknowledges this, saying that you can't measure the penisiness of a penis, so just a nice self-refutation there, thank you. Then we have another video of mine called Meditations on the Wrong Generation. This video is about whether there is any legitimate claim for a generation to say that they've been born in the wrong generation because being born earlier would have been better. And the main argument I make is that the rise of the internet and the immediate availability of information has made society worse in a lot of ways. My argument is presented as someone who was born in 1995 and therefore didn't really have this concept of streaming entire shows and movies online until I was already well into my teenage years. I was the last generation that got to experience waiting for my favorite show to appear on the TV and knowing that if I wasn't in front of a TV at the time it was scheduled to go live, I would struggle to be able to watch it anywhere else. I feel like there was a lot of joy, and I might even go so far as to say meaning, from that sense of immediacy and of community there. The fact that this was before smartphones, where most houses just had one TV, and everyone would gather around and watch that one TV together. And now that kids can just go off on their own and watch an endless stream of slop on their tablet, that's going to make their childhoods much worse, and that's something we should be actively fighting against. My next video is responding to ContraPoints on autogynephilia and the question of whether autogynephilia actually exists. And therein, I present my main argument for autogynephilia being a thing, and it's a really basic one. You don't have to look far to find men fetishizing the idea of being feminized. You can see it on 4chan, you can see it on Reddit, you can see it on Twitter. And my argument is just that considering we know that these men exist, and we also know that there are men who actually claim to be women, it would be totally absurd to suggest that these two things have nothing to do with each other, obviously. So boom, that's all that needs to be said. Obviously, just based on that, autogynephilia must explain some amount of why people are identifying as trans. Contra's main argument against this is just saying, well, obviously, being trans affects every aspect of your life, and therefore it can't just be a fetish. Now, aside from the fact there are a lot of people with anime profiles on Twitter whose entire trans identity exists as nothing more than an online LARP, it's also the case that plenty of people are willing to impact their entire lives just for the sake of short-term sexual gratification, so Contra is simply wrong here. Right, now we start off June with one of the weirdest videos ever, I guess partially because it's centered on a particular challenge I presented to my audience. I asked people in an earlier video whether they had any examples of me sounding really confident talking about one topic, but then just totally falling apart and being blatantly unable to defend my position on a different topic. And the example I gave of something similar as a case study for what I was expecting was this video of the YouTuber Big Joel sounding really confident talking about this one political issue. And then when he's talking about the trans issue, he suddenly just changes to being like, well, I mean, that's kind of dumb, isn't it? I mean, I don't think that trans people are trying to brainwash us. And that's since been my go-to example of what it looks like when someone who's otherwise quite smart tries to defend a position that they actually have no good argument for. And part of this video is just me restating that point, explaining exactly why I think that Joel makes a good argument in the one case, but a terrible argument in the other. But also, a large part of it is me responding to the response I got, which was someone saying, actually, you make a bad argument even in this video that you present as an example of Joel making a bad argument, because he goes on to elaborate on why he supports the trans issue later, and you just ignored that. But he doesn't. It's just wrong. That's not true. He doesn't mention the trans issue at all after that thing that he says in the video that I already just explained, except for one summarizing statement. There is no elaboration, and that made this a very weird, almost transcendent video for me to be making. So yeah, check this video out if you're interested to see what it looks like when I am responding to and debunking a claim that is just blatantly not true. You'd be impressed by how much I can pad it out. My next video is called Why I Support High Taxes, and it had a really basic argument. We're in a really bad situation right now, and the best way for society to get out of a bad situation is for us to all band together. That means culturally, socially, spiritually, and of course, economically. And my argument was that since people aren't choosing to come together, but instead becoming more and more individualized and isolated, we need the state to have the power to enforce top-down everyone working together, and that means forcing all of us to pay really high taxes, a heavy tax burden to fix the problems we have right now. Pretty basic argument. If we have a big problem, we need to come together and fix it, and the only real way I can see that happening is through state mandates. One thing, recently I spoke to someone about this video and they said, as if refuting me, well, once we fix all the problems in society, it wouldn't make sense to continue having high taxes. So to clarify that point now, I'll just say, yeah, my argument was because we have this terrible situation, we should have high taxes, but my expectation was that in improving society, we would make it so in the long term, we don't have to pay high taxes. In fact, we could probably get away with in the future, once we fixed all the big problems in society, paying fewer taxes than we are right now. Now, in June I went on holiday, and what I've been doing when I go on holiday recently is posting some shorter clips from some videos that I worked on for a second channel. That second channel is now my vlog channel, where I posted the aforementioned New Year's resolution video, and of course where I will post the Oscar review video. But yeah, since I've repurposed that channel, I felt like I should take those shorter videos, which was what the channel was originally intended for, and put them somewhere else, namely here. So yeah, there isn't really a singular point to this video because it's just a collection of shorter videos, but I guess I'll just summarize the first video I present. Basically, Contra tries to argue that calling for transgenderism to be eradicated is the same thing as calling for trans individuals to be eradicated, obviously. And the main argument for this is that calling for Michael Knowlesism to be eradicated would clearly be understood as calling for the death of Michael Knowles. But no, in fact, in reality, we have plenty of ideologies that are named after specific people. People can oppose those ideologies, and that doesn't mean they want the individuals who founded those ideologies to be dead. Indeed, most people after whom ideologies are named are already dead. Next video is about whether we all get gender-affirming care. This was a shorter video, it might even be my shortest of the year, but it packs a punch. Basically, I point out that all the examples people give of gender-affirming care, supposedly, for cis people, aren't actually about gender affirmation at all, and in many times actively go against it. For example, going bald is much more of a masculine trait than it is a feminine trait, but most men go out of their way to avoid becoming bald. Indeed, most men would rather be unable to grow a beard than to go bald, so they're double rejecting the masculine trait. They don't have much interest in growing a beard, and they definitely don't want to go bald. The point is, it's not about masculinity, and it's not about them needing to affirm their masculine man gender. It's just about generic beauty standards. Another broad beauty standard is symmetry. So I argue that women who get a breast implant after having a mastectomy aren't doing that because they think, oh man, now I'm only half a woman. No woman would think like that. It's just that that would make them look asymmetrical, which would be considered kind of weird by most people, and that's what they want to avoid. So yeah, overall, this is just a classic example of trans people being self-obsessed, viewing the world through their own lens, and not realizing that many other people have totally different priorities from them. Right, next we have someone who responded to my video where I lay out my comprehensive debunking of trans ideology, which of course I've already explained here. The problem is that much of his video is just him saying, none of this matters, why would anyone care, things like that. Even his own audience is calling him out in the comments for not actually engaging with the argument. And the worst thing is that he kind of shows himself in the video why this matters, because he says, well, trans identity is just like a religious claim, right? Many people believe religions and we let them believe that even if we don't think it makes sense. And yes, but if it was mandated either socially or legally that you have to use language consistent with other people's religions, would you agree with that? Would you think that's okay, or would you have a problem? And also, it is perfectly acceptable for someone to make a video explaining why they don't believe a series of religious claims without having to think that this matters massively as a political issue. So yeah, his religion analogy just destroyed the entire conceit of his video that this isn't actually something that matters, because if trans ideology is like a religion, it should be treated very differently from how progressives are treating it. Side note, I have realized, by the way, that a lot of the time me summarizing the main point of the video is just me summarizing the first point made in the video, and if you go back and watch through the videos, you'll notice this. This is not because I only rewatched the first portions of the video when I made this recap. Most of them I already remembered the overall point of the video from having made them, or I just gave them a quick rewatch myself while I was doing something else to refresh my memory. I hate to toot my own horn, but I do personally think it's just a matter of I'm really good at structuring my videos such that usually the main point of the video is the first point I express, because I like to have that thesis statement right there so you know what my video is getting at. My next video is called This Law Changes Everything for the UK, and it was about the prescribing of Palestine action. My argument here was that while as a free speech absolutist I do oppose all criminalisation of speech in the UK, I view this law in particular to be a Rubicon moment. Firstly, because Palestine action did not represent an extremist position. Their main goal was to stop the UK from funding Israel, and that's something that many people in the UK would agree with. And secondly, because Palestine action does not engage in violent acts of terrorism, but simply property damage. For those who don't know, an organisation being prescribed in the UK means you cannot legally say that you support them, or else you risk a maximum of 14 years in prison. 14 years in prison for saying you support property damage in the interests of stopping arms exports to Israel. This is, in my view, a huge step up in terms of thought policing in the UK. And the result of it is you had old women, disabled, blind men being arrested as terrorists. And again, to emphasize, I am still a free speech absolutist. I am against all forms of prohibition of free speech, but I can recognize that there is a difference between inappropriate state overreach and full-on authoritarianism. And another thing about me is I don't do clickbait. I do not exaggerate small, inconsequential things as if they are the biggest news ever. This still remains, in my mind, a watershed moment over half a year later. It will remain, in my mind, very significant unless things get a lot better or a lot worse. When I say something like this in a video, I mean it. I will stand by this position likely until the day I die, that this was a serious moment where the UK took a massive turn for the worse. Now, after this, I had a very uncharacteristic break. I have been very diligent about getting one video up per week. I've been doing that for, now it's been 2 years since I started doing that, but in July, I gave myself a week off. I understand if you want to unsubscribe. It's justified, frankly. It's because I bought a new house and it was a bit of a fixer-upper. So for a lot of July, I was over there doing some DIY and I didn't really have time to be making as many videos as I would have liked. Sorry. But my next video is a video I really enjoyed making. Again, an example of how I don't do clickbait. The video is called The One Thing in Objective Morality That Nobody Talks About. And yeah, it is something I've never heard anyone else talk about. Meta-ethical subjectivism has no basis on your actual ethics. Basically, I'm responding to those who think that ethical subjectivism automatically engenders a more permissive society. But I point out that such a notion would be contradictory, because meta-ethical subjectivism is the belief that you cannot derive a moral claim from a factual one. But that belief itself is a factual claim, and therefore you couldn't derive a moral claim from it. As such, whatever ethical beliefs an ethical subjective has, that belief can't be attributed to their ethical subjectivism. And therefore, a more permissive moral framework can't possibly emerge from ethical subjectivism. Have you ever heard anyone else talk about that? I bet you haven't. Fun fact, by the way, this video is the longest I've ever sat on a video idea in my life. I came up with the idea for this video when I was 19 years old. When I was still at university, just looking into ethical subjectivism, I thought, I should make a video on this topic. And I mean specifically the argument I presented here, not just a vague idea of a video about this topic. This exact argument I've had in my mind for 19 years, and pretty much the exact same structure of how I would present it. And I didn't make this actual video until I was 29. 10 years later. Next, I responded to the video, It's Never About Chromosomes by some guy. This video fails even according to its title, because the title is It's Never About Chromosomes, but in reality, chromosome variation is like 0.2% of the time, with slight variation depending on studies. So what he means when he says it's never about chromosomes is more, it's about chromosomes in 99.8% of cases. So he tries to argue it's not about chromosomes, what it's really about is gender, but then what he says about gender is very weird. He says that gender is about how you're treated by society, so being sexually harassed by your boss is gender. But then he also says that gender is about how you feel about how you're being treated, so if you don't like being sexually harassed by your boss, that's also gender. So gender is simultaneously the way you are treated and also how you feel about the way you're treated, which already sounds like a pretty horrible construct to impose on people. But then there's the fact that also, according to this video, your gender is about whether you're a man or woman. So being a woman is being sexually harassed by your boss and then hating it. That is definitionally what a woman is. I think most women would rather it was about chromosomes. That's probably a little bit less oppressive. Anyway, so yeah, new house, still working on it. So I made 2 really easy videos where I just worked my way through the entire iconic political compass test. And with that said, there wasn't really a discernible point to this, except for, of course, finding out what my politics actually is. I guess I'll just give a shout out to my more controversial opinions. Although in the first one, I'm not really sure what my most controversial opinion is, because I feel like this would only really be controversial in the UK, but I said that I think pro-lifers have a good point, and it definitely makes sense to me that people are pro-life. And I brought this up because I saw a story recently about how a pro-life group at a British university had been banned, and Brits were just aghast at the fact that such a group could even exist in the UK. How could this possibly be? How could this be allowed to happen? Who are these crazy people? So yeah, maybe this is controversial, but essentially what I said there is actually, it does make sense to me that people would have a problem with someone ending the life of a baby in the the womb. And actually, okay, looking at part 2, my most controversial opinion there is actually so controversial, I'm going to dedicate an entire video to it probably in this coming year. So what I will add, and maybe this is the main takeaway from my response to the political compass, is that a lot of the questions are just really bad. Like, one of the questions is, one of the advantages of a one-party state is it avoids many of the inefficiencies of multi-party democracy, or something like that. But like, you could totally agree with that, but still be entirely opposed to a one-party state because you prioritize other things over efficiency. Ultimately, agreeing or disagreeing with that question does nothing to actually indicate what your politics are, so it's a bad question. Next, we have this response to Rebecca Watson, where I point out her selective skepticism and evident idiocy on the topic of trans identity. And in this case, there's no question about what to highlight, because it is one of the most stupid claims I've heard from any otherwise serious respected YouTuber in all the time I've been doing this. Rebecca Watson, supposedly skeptical feminist, says that she wasn't a woman because she liked maths and sports. Yep, she likes maths, she likes sports, so she concluded based on this, she might have a hormone imbalance, and she went to the doctor to be tested for abnormally high amounts of testosterone because she liked maths and sports. Yes, obviously she realized the error of her ways, but the point is, in the video, she doesn't just present this as, hey everyone, look at how stupid I was, like a stupid idiot moron. Instead, it's more like, hey everyone, let me tell you a story about my personal growth, where my opinions on gender and identity have changed over time. Yeah, the trans ideologues aren't sending their best. Although, for a change of pace, my next video was about whether there are some trans terms that are actually useful. Obviously, we all know that trans-affirming language is broadly nonsense, and it confers no benefit when you use it. But the main point of this video was to contend that there are some terms associated with trans ideology that actually are quite useful. And the big one is cis. My main argument is that since there is this massive argument in society right now about trans ideology, it makes sense to have a term to distinguish those who are trans from those who are not trans. And I say that since not trans sounds kind of clunky, and cis in Latin does literally communicate the opposite meaning to trans, it would be useful to just use the word cis. Nonetheless, I don't use the term very often in my videos, but yeah, it would just be slightly easier for me if I did. Moving into autumn, I looked at Jordan Peterson on Jubilee and discussed his annoying insistence on constantly wanting to define words. And I wanted to communicate the difference between actually usefully defining terms in a way that helps advance the debate, and what Peterson does where he's just annoying and he wastes everyone's time and he stops any productive discussion from happening. And I came up with a few rules to actually define terms in a way that helps facilitate debates rather than stopping them. Of which the first one was, rather than stopping someone, to ask them, how are you defining that term? Instead, where possible, ask a more clarifying question like, do you mean this specific thing? Or what about this specific case? So you can address the specific problem you have with how they're defining it. Or even better, say, well, here's how I would define that term. Do you agree with that, or are there some issues you have with that definition? That way, you're massively advancing the question because you're letting them know what you think while also getting an answer to the question you wanted. And that's how you argue like an actually intelligent person rather than a Jordan Peterson. Anyway, the next video was tackling the attacks people sometimes like to make against so-called white feminism. And here I just had one central, really important argument to communicate, and it was against this academic woman of color or black chick. And she was basically saying, ugh, white women just don't understand what it's like to be a woman of color because they can retreat to being white where they then have privilege, whereas for women of color, we are always oppressed no matter what. And the funny thing about that is she's criticizing white women for not recognizing that while they are oppressed as women, there are some demographics by which they're not oppressed. But then she fails to appreciate that save for just one other demographic, the exact same thing is true of non-white women. They can be privileged based on class, physical health, sexuality, mental health, and myriad other things. So honestly, like, zero self-awareness as this non-white woman is criticizing white women for not recognizing that they are privileged as white women. She is totally failing herself to recognize that there are many other nexuses of oppression, yes, beyond sex, but also beyond race. Just a total hypocrite. The next video was my most important video of the year and easily my least popular. Fewer than 10% of my audience watched it. Which is in some sense annoying because this video was about the future of my channel and I have proceeded with these changes thinking that, oh yeah, everyone's just going to be aware of these changes being made because I talked about them at length in that video about the future of my channel. But yeah, most people just aren't aware of that, so I'm going to have to put up with people being like, oh, I didn't know you were doing this particular thing, why are you doing that? And in reality, this video probably also isn't going to be very popular because last year's recap video wasn't very popular, and my videos recently have been in a bit of a slump. Hopefully that picks up. Anyway, so that video was just me talking about my plans for my presence on YouTube, and since it was a while ago, I guess I should give an update on how those plans have been going. First plan was to start streaming twice a week on my religion channel and also to post daily shorts. I am streaming 2 times a week, usually, and the shorts are going well, except I did recently fall behind, so I'm having to catch up by posting more than 1 short a day. I also wanted to start streaming gameplay and do a reaction to that massive transphobia debunk video. That had been going well, but I gave it a break over Christmas because I had some stuff to catch up with, and I haven't yet got back into the habit at the time of recording this, and hopefully I will be doing it Thursday, which should be the day after this goes up. I also wanted to start doing weekly vlogs on my vlog channel, which again I've mentioned, and I did start doing that once a week, but again, I'll just say it one last time, I fell behind a lot towards the end of December, which is to say towards the end of last year. The main thing I haven't done yet is utilize the fact that I have a master's in international journalism to start an international relations podcast, which is something I want to do, and hopefully I'll get round to that this year. The main point of the video was just that I'm aware that I cannot keep talking about this trans issue forever and expect the same amount of interest to be maintained in it indefinitely. So I'm having to diversify what I'm doing, and that's what I've been trying to do with all these new ventures. Next video was about how and why kids get tricked into being trans, and it was centered around one point. The problem is, since trans doesn't have a definition, you can trick kids into identifying as it because it's unfalsifiable. You can't trick a kid into being gay or left-handed because these concepts have clear definitions, so if they're not actually that thing, it will be immediately obvious. However, if you tell a kid that they're trans, there's nothing that they can investigate for themselves that would ever provide evidence that's not actually true. In October, although I believe actually scheduled to be released in September, we had the start of a massive project, my biggest project of the year, which was a 2-part endeavor to go through the entirety of Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. My main criticism in the first part was Judith Butler doesn't really say very much at all, and she's very guilty of a new term that I invented called nonsense laundering. Basically, through citing the works of many other academics, she introduces loads of nonsense ideas and doesn't actually provide any of her own commentary on them. It allows her to introduce loads of nonsense ideas like that lesbians aren't actually women, but she can't be held accountable for making that claim because she didn't make it. So most of her book should be dismissed as not her opinion, not her own work, not worth anyone else engaging with. Next, we just had an easy but incredibly long video where I did this massive Q&A. It's a shame this video didn't get more views because I thought it was really fun, and I would like it if my audience knew me a little bit better as a person. There were loads of questions here about my favorite music, favorite films, favorite food, stuff like that. I think it would be worth just highlighting one particular question, and the one that I would like to highlight is someone asked me, what is a quality that makes me instantly respect another person? And my response was the ability to recognize the quality of arguments even if you disagree with them, or the lack of quality in arguments even if you do agree with them. It's just there's way too many people out there who seem to believe that someone is good as arguing for as long as they agree with them, but the second that they believe something other than what they would agree with, that means they've instantly become bad at arguing, conveniently. Whereas I've always been able to completely separate my agreement with a position and my assessment of the quality of the arguments in that position, so that's something I look for in other people. The next video was called Equivocation, the Trans Agenda Bait and Switch, and this is where I focused on one of the central arguments that I'm always returning back to whenever I'm criticizing trans ideology. And actually, I think the vast majority of bad arguments can be reduced to some sort of equivocation, where you're taking two different but similar concepts and acting like they are equivalent. Probably the most frequent example of equivocation you see from trans people is their use of the term gender. They'll use gender to talk about being masculine or feminine and say that that is volitional, fluid, subjective, and anybody who is remotely intelligent would probably agree with that. And then they'll say, so that means you accept transgender identities. But the problem is that they're using the term transgender to mean changing into being a man or woman, which is a totally separate discussion. It is equivocation when these people talk about gender as meaning both masculinity and femininity and being a man or woman. And if you can identify that equivocation, you will be very able to reject their nonsense arguments. Next, I did one of my more enjoyable videos where I invited on popular live streamer Mary Chu. For those who don't know, Mary basically does similar to what I used to do when this channel was entirely about live streams, just responding to trans activist content. I'd recommend you check out the channel. In fact, actually, it will be linked to in the original video. So obviously you are going to click on the playlist below. You're going to make your way through all the videos. So when you get to the video featuring Mary Chu, there I will tell you to go subscribe, and you should. But yeah, so Mary has a lot of experience responding to one of my favoritely bad trans content creators, Katie Montgomery, and even does a really good impression. With that said, what we were doing is making fun of a load of Katie's comic formatted arguments that are supposed to explain why trans is good and GCs are bad. And one of the funniest of these was Katie trying to counter the claim that when trans people die, scientists will look at their skeletons and identify them as biologically the sex they were, by coming out of this fantasy where people will find Katie's body 1,000 years in the future and be like, oh, this is the body of a trans woman because the gravestone says Katie Montgomery and I Googled her name. Like, yeah, definitely. Archaeologists will be Googling people's names from 1,000 years ago so that they don't get cancelled by the woke mob for misgendering their skeleton. Sure. Next, concluding October and coinciding with Reformation Day, I released my video, Why I'm Not a Catholic. I presented 5 reasons, and that was without even getting into the biggest issue, which is that Catholicism is totally wrong on the theology of the Bible itself. I think all 5 of these arguments are fantastic. Any one of them is good enough reason to never even consider becoming Catholic, but my favourite one would have to be that Catholics argue as atheists. Because every single time I talk about theology in any sort of deep sense, I always get the exact same response from atheists. How can you know that your interpretation is correct? Why do you know what the scripture is saying? But then I also get the exact same question from Catholics because they want me to accept their cult's official interpretation. The difference here is that the atheist position is consistent. You cannot know what scripture is saying, therefore you should just reject all of it and become an atheist. That actually makes sense. While the Catholic position is totally illogical. You cannot know how to interpret scripture, so you should join my religion because my religion's interpretation of scripture is correct, even though I've just said rationally, you do not have the ability to determine whether a interpretation of scripture is correct in the first place, which makes what I'm saying completely irrational. Yeah, as much as I disagree with atheists, at least they're consistent and as such will never be as stupid as Catholics. Side note, I thought this video would do really well for my channel because I expected it would entice at least one Catholic apologist to respond. And the big benefit there would be while they'd probably disagree with my take on their religion, they would agree with my stance on the trans issue. So that would mean a whole load of people coming from Trent Horn and Iron Inquisitor and Keith Neister, and they would actually stick around for my anti-trans content. It was actually deeply disheartening to see no Catholic make any effort to respond to this video, and I would say, even if you're not a Catholic, just for the sake of helping this channel out, go and irritate a Catholic reaction tuber until they actually make a response to this. Come on. I need this. Now, starting off November, let's talk about Matt Dillahunty and a video he made trying to discuss whether or not certain analogies could be used to evidence that trans ideology is correct. And what I mostly did is show how none of the analogies he presented worked because no analogy is perfect and he didn't explain how these analogies are actually analogous to trans identity, because I would say the things that make them different are very significant. And the other thing he tries to do is engage with the classic analogy used against trans identity, yep, the attack helicopters argument. He responds to this by saying that a helicopter is not within the available list of things for a human being to identify as. And I got the easiest debunking ever set up for me. A woman is not within the available list of things for a biological male to identify as. Now, after a much-deserved break, I returned back to Judith Butler to continue responding to gender trouble. In this, I mostly just threw together all of the disparate notes I had, and I even acknowledged in that video that in doing so, I might be misrepresenting some things. You know, because, as I'd already said, most of the book doesn't make any sort of argument, just for the sake of having something to respond to, to, and justifying all the time I spent reading that book, I had to contrive some sort of argument there. One thing she does say though, which I just found really funny because it gives an indication of where this book is at, is she's like, lesbianism is not a political movement. I just think that's so funny because it shows where you end up if you deny the importance of sex, because obviously lesbianism is about biological sex, females attracted to females. But because she's so committed to queer theory, she's forced to have to make this acknowledgement of, hey, just so everyone knows, lesbianism isn't a political theory, because basically, if you believe in trans ideology, it might as well be. After this, I made another video that I've had in my head for a long time called Masculinity Critiqued. And yeah, the point here was really, really simple. Essentially, masculinity says that you need to be strong, a rugged individualist, self-guided, not caring what other people say, just forging your own way. But masculinity is about being incredibly prissy, making sure you're always doing the things you're supposed to be doing, never behaving in a way that is insufficiently masculine. And that's obviously just cucked. All these manosphere channels could never be as sigma as me, someone who just lives the way I want to live and is perfectly comfortable with that. I'm the alpha, fight me. And then we have a video called No Self-ID Equals No Opinion. And this is responding to UK politician Zach Polanski, who said it is hypocritical for women to say you need to be a woman in order to have an opinion on women's rights, because many of these women have an opinion on trans rights, even though they themselves are not trans. However, the big difference here is that the gender-critical position is based in the belief that woman has a coherent, undeniable material definition that actually impacts someone's standpoint. However, being trans, that doesn't have a meaning. Someone can just choose to identify as trans, so saying that trans is a qualification you need to meet in order to be equipped to comment on the issue makes no sense when anyone can just identify as trans tomorrow and, according to Zach Polanski's logic, immediately become qualified. Anyway, now we enter the last month and the most wonderful time of the year, December. And we come first of all to the video that was ripping off Based If True and was also repeatedly calling him Based Is True for some reason. That's just like a thing my brain does. I can't process that it's based if true. Anyway, so basically we're supposed to do something together, but blah blah blah, he was busy, whatever, it's difficult to coordinate things, the video was better without him anyway. And the video was just making fun of the subreddit that's entirely dedicated to hating J.K. Rowling. There are a few things to make fun of here in terms of just how unhinged they are. Probably my favourite though was the top post of the month that I made the video, which was a woman complaining that she used to just use the men's bathroom whenever the women's bathroom was too busy, and now it's J.K. Rowling's fault, she can't do that anymore. I just think that's such an unimportant and tangential reason to be hating J.K. Rowling that it perfectly sums up the entire subreddit. Next, we have a response to the strangest response video I've ever received. Basically, I say that trans identity is an incorrect claim about reality. That's like a catchphrase of mine. It's because I like to remind people that trans identity is a claim about reality. You know, when you say trans women are women, that's a claim you're making. And like any claim, it's either true or false, and you need to be able to defend it. Now, yeah, the fact that I feel the need to point this out and remind people of that shows it's not something people typically acknowledge because they usually try to moralize the issue, but it isn't something I ever thought someone would explicitly deny. Until this guy came along and tried to argue that actually trans identity isn't a claim about reality. And as you can imagine, that video was incredibly bad. Like, I can't even really summarize how I debunked him because it's pretty difficult to debunk someone whose main claim is that they're not making a claim in the first place. Very funny video though. Next, and penultimately, we have a video about whether it's true to say that everyone self-identifies. Mostly what I focus on here is that to self-identify just means to believe, to have a belief about yourself. And we need to understand that you can believe something that is true for a good reason, like a biological female believing herself to be and self-identifying as a woman, or you can believe that which is false for a bad reason, like a biological male believing himself to be and self-identifying as a woman. And this leads to the big one, not in terms of views, but in terms of reaction and significance, my 5 reasons I'm not an atheist. I can't really be bothered to summarize this one because I literally made it as the most recent video. It was the last video I made. And also I would just pick one of the 5 reasons I gave and just repeat it, which would be pretty pointless. What I will say though, again, is I really would expect to see some video response to this. Not with the same likelihood of growing my channel long term, because I would imagine that atheist channels would be a lot less anti-trans than Catholic ones. But yeah, at this point, it's early days enough that I'm not yet going to conclude that atheists are as cowardly as Catholics have been. But yeah, you know, it's my 5 reasons I'm not an atheist. I would expect some atheist to make a video to debunk my 5 reasons. Even if you don't care about the atheism debate, just for the sake of helping my channel, send that video to every single atheist response bro you know, just saying, hey, look at this idiot moron. Show everyone what a massive idiot he is with a response video. Because yeah, in the long term, that's only going to help me out, especially since my arguments are actually really good. So any attempt to reply to them, I'm easily going to be able to hit back against. I'm almost on the verge of saying that unless I get at least 1 response to my 5 reasons I'm not an atheist video, I will delete every single critical comment from the comment section of that video. Because how are you guys going to expect me to waste my time arguing with random nobodies in the comment section? The entire point of that video was to bait some big atheist channel into doing a response, into totally destroying me with facts and logic. Less cynically put, I think if I've laid out my 5 reasons, and I've been very honest about those 5 reasons, if you think that those reasons are really bad, then credit me with the fact that I'm so honest that I presented bad reasons just because they actually are the genuine reasons I believe what I do. And I think that does warrant a response. So yeah, I haven't got a response from any of my religion videos this year. Obviously, I wasn't really expecting one about the Jews, but yeah, nothing from the Catholics or the atheists either. There's only one religion video I made prior to this year, and that was a video on 5 reasons I'm not a Muslim. I got like half a dozen response videos from Muslims to that. And honestly, the response videos were pretty good. There is one argument I make in that video, one of those 5 reasons I'm not a Muslim, that I would no longer consider to be a valid reason. Because some of the Muslims who responded to me, they actually pointed out the issues with that argument. And I now accept that was not a good argument. It shouldn't have made it into the video. So yeah, the Muslims are putting all the other groups to shame right now. Until I get a response from a Catholic and an atheist, I'm going to be holding the Muslims in very high regard and thinking, you know what, compared to the Muslims who actually made responses and actually even managed to get me to admit, admittedly I didn't admit this publicly until now, but internally I recognize that one of those reasons wasn't very good. The atheists and the Catholics, they haven't done anything. Come on, do it. Hurry up. Anyway, everyone, so this video actually took a while. It's one of those things where this is a thing I do all the time. I forget how long a video gets if you have multiple chapters. I'm also going to move. Oh, that's fun. Because obviously I'm just going to break this down by month. And because each individual chapter was quite short, I was like, oh, this won't take very long at all. But of course, in reality, when you have 12 chapters compared to I usually have like 3 or 4 chapters, even if these chapters were only a third of the length, that's still going to be way longer. So yeah, basically, that's the situation. I said I might offer up some commentary on the situation in terms of this channel. Basically all there is to it is I've really been struggling with actually working out how much I'm able to do. The most insane thing happened yesterday. So I was already behind schedule, right? And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to redo my schedule for this week. Just make it so that I sacrifice a few things, but I realign it. So I started yesterday with a fresh clean slate. Just, okay, I'm going into this, and I swear to the Lord above, I was working consistently all day. From waking up to going to bed, I was just working the entire day. So tell me how it is I ended up 2.5 hours behind schedule. Absolutely bizarre. I have no explanation for it. It was just weird. Because I just, and I don't know, the whole day, I kind of was just feeling like, I'm just working, I'm in the zone, blah, blah, blah. And then about dinner time, I was like, hold on a minute, wait. Some of the stuff that, I don't know, I just can't explain it. But yeah, that's the big thing that I'm trying to work on. Oh, hello. Did we run out of space? Oh, no, we still have space. It just stopped for some reason. Anyway, that's the big thing. I just need to sort it out. Why is it that I don't know. I feel like there must be something I'm doing that's taking way more time than I'm realizing. And I'm doing that thing. I'm kind of like feeling like I'm in the zone, not quite paying attention to the time. And I'm actually spending way longer doing that thing than I'm realizing. But yeah, that's like the big challenge for this year, to work out what I actually am capable of doing to be productive and get stuff done. And that's it, really. It's just be productive, don't procrastinate, stay on top of things. That's the plan. And then once I've done that, because that was the main downside of last year. Like, it's kind of weird because I feel like my views fell off. And I like to believe that the number of views you get and how hard you work is not actually that connected in YouTube. Because there's always this sense of YouTube is just this unfair place where there's not really any logic to it. It's just a cruel, arbitrary algorithm and blah, blah, blah. But to be fair, the videos have been doing worse as I've been doing worse in terms of my work ethic. Like, I feel like I have been rushing videos a lot more. I've been a lot less on top of things. I've been finishing videos the same day they're supposed to be coming out. Yeah, there's issues with that. So I just need to get back on top of it. That's literally all I need to do. And I told my wife, like, there's no more DIY happening until I'm back on top and several weeks ahead of schedule, because this is ridiculous. Anyway, what else was I going to say? Was there anything else? Oh, yeah. A few other things. I feel like I probably need some more technology. This camera is annoying the goodness gracious out of me. The fact I have terrible lighting in this room, that's just going to be an enduring issue. There's no way around that. But yeah, this camera, the way it like randomly gets blurry at some points, I don't like it. Whatever. And yeah, but I guess most of my stuff, it just all extends from I need to be working harder, but I don't know if it is working harder. It's working out what I'm actually able to do and stop wasting time. Like, there's something I'm doing that's taking way too long. I need to work out what it is, and I don't know. Anyway, here's a clip from the bonus video for Patreon. Here you go.
Hey, let's talk about that. What do you mean by that? Let's say it's a boy, just so I'm not constantly having to switch. What would be different about your life if people thought you were a girl, or if you were a girl? Is it something that you want to do differently? Children have very concrete ideas about things. They think that only boys can do some things and only girls can do some things.
Yeah, that's basically it. I was thinking while I was preparing my smoothie, in a way, saying to someone, you will never be a woman, or saying to a woman, you will never be a man, is actually kind of an empowering message. Because what you're saying there is that as a woman, you can be anything. Because nothing you do will stop you being a woman. That's pretty empowering, right? You're basically saying, look, you can go to space. You can be an astronaut. You can join the army. Or don't join the army. But you can do all sorts of things that maybe will be considered kind of male. You can be the head CEO of a company. You can be the prime minister, whatever else. You will never be a man. What you're saying there is, as a woman, you can do anything. So if you enjoyed that, good. And I'll just say bye. And I'll see you all next week, sort of. The thing is, I'm actually... because I'm behind schedule with uploading, at some point I need to upload 2 videos in 1 week. But I don't know when it's going to happen. Bye.